So, building off of what we know about prototyping and integrating the first round of user testing, how can we make a more realistic version of our app? So, this lecture is going to expand on the vital practice in the process of creating a successful user experience by developing a working prototype of an app. So the fidelity of a prototype refers to its level of completeness and detail. The degree of completeness of a prototype you build depends on the stage of progress, and these include a low fidelity prototype, the one that's here on the left. It has a low cost, it's rough, and it's quick to build. Now, we discussed this type of a few lectures ago and even built one for our proposed app. The middle one here is the medium fidelity prototype. It's slightly more detailed. It's still, though, rough, but it's closer to the solution. And then the one on the right here, this is a high fidelity prototype. It's much closer to like the final. It's going to be very detailed, and it of course, is going to be much more time consuming. Now, unlike paper prototypes and clickable wireframe, high fidelities or hi-fi prototypes appear and function as similar as possible to the actual product that's going to ship. Teams usually create high fidelity prototypes when they have a solid understanding of what they're actually going to be building, and they need to either test it with real users or get like final design approval from the stakeholders. Now, the basic characteristics of a high fidelity prototype are going to include more realistic and detailed design. All the interface elements, the spacing, the graphics look just like a real app or a website. And then, one of the characteristics deals with content. Designers are going to be using like real or similar to real content. And the prototype is going to include most or all of, say, the content that's going to appear in the final design. And then the last characteristic is that prototypes are highly realistic in their interactions. Now, while high fidelity prototypes in mobile app design offer a more realistic or detailed representation of the final product, but they are going to come with their own set of advantages and limitations. So some of the pros of a high fidelity prototype for a mobile app is that a high fidelity prototype is going to closely resemble the final product in terms of design, interaction, and functionality. And this is going to give a clearer picture of the end product, allowing stakeholders to better understand the user experience. Also, users can interact with a high fidelity prototype more naturally, allowing for better user testing and feedback collection. And this engagement often leads to more accurate insight into user preferences and behaviors. In other words, the results in more meaningful, it's going to result in more meaningful feedback, during usability testing. And this also supports improved testability, of specific UI elements or interactions. So with high fidelity interactivity, it's possible to test, say, graphical elements like affordance or specific interactions such as like animated transactions and micro interactions. High fidelity prototypes also facilitate better decision making for developers, designers, and stakeholders by providing a detailed and tangible representation. It's easier to identify and resolve design issues and discrepancies at this stage. And these prototypes aid in effective communication among team members, as they offer a common visual reference that everyone can understand and discuss. And then a last maybe benefit would be that high fidelity prototypes can be used for presentations, demonstrations, and even marketing purposes to showcase like the design and features of the app to potential investors and clients and users. It gives clients and potential investors a clearer idea of how a product is supposed to work. An excellent high fidelity prototype gets people excited, about your design in ways, say, a low fidelity, bare bones prototype can't do. Now, with all that said, let's talk about some of the cons or the drawbacks of a high fidelity prototype for mobile apps. First of all, it's going to be time consuming. Developing a high fidelity prototype is going to be more time consuming as it involves intricate details, design elements and functionality, which can delay the design and the development process. They also require more resources, including, skilled designers and developers. In comparison to, say, low fidelity prototypes, creating a high fidelity prototype implies higher costs, and more financial investments. Also, focusing extensively on design details might sometimes lead to overlooking, or neglecting essential functionalities and user experience aspects. And then, despite their detail, high fidelity prototypes might still need alterations or changes, and making modifications at this stage can be more complicated and time consuming. And then stakeholders also might confuse a high fidelity prototype for a final product, leading to misunderstandings and premature conclusions about the app's readiness. I've had this happen, where I provided a prototype that the stakeholders thought that, oh, well, we're almost done. And it's like, no, this is just a prototype. This is not the actual product. And then also making substantial changes at this stage, can be challenging, as the level of detail and the complexity, make like iterations more difficult than say when you were dealing with like the low fidelity prototypes. Okay, so now that we've talked about high fidelity prototypes, which again are more detailed, I want you to kind of look at this sort of example here of comparing a medium to a high fidelity prototype. So the high fidelity prototype, again, like I said, it's going to have more of the look and the feel of the final product. And these high fidelity prototypes are usually created using the same tools or the programming language that's used in the final development product. But for a medium fidelity prototype, these are going to be more detailed than, say, the low fidelity prototype, but not as much detail as the high fidelity prototype. Now, a medium fidelity prototype sits between low fidelity and high fidelity prototypes in the design process. It represents a stage where the basic structure and functionality of a product or design are more developed than in a low fidelity prototype, but not as detailed as a high fidelity one. Now, some characteristics are that the visual design in a medium fidelity prototype is more refined. It includes basic colors, shapes, and sometimes placeholder content. Allowing stakeholders to visualize the look and the feel of the final product. It may have some interactive elements such as a clickable button or a link, but they might not be as polished or fully functional, say, as a high fidelity prototype. Now, medium fidelity prototypes are often used for user testing and gathering feedback, and they provide a more realistic representation of the final product, allowing users to interact and provide feedback, on its functionality and usability. It also strikes a balance between the time and the resources spent on development. It's more detailed, say, than a low fidelity prototype, but it doesn't require the extensive resources needed for a high fidelity prototype. Now, it's important to remember that a medium fidelity prototype is not the final product. It's a stepping stone towards the final version, allowing for further refinement and improvement based on user feedback and testing. Now, digital prototypes are virtual representations of a product or a system, typically created through software to simulate the functionality, design, and user experience. And these prototypes can range from, having being a low fidelity wireframe to a high fidelity interactive model. and they are used in various industries such as software development, product design, and user experience design. Now, these prototypes can be created for various purposes, including user testing, feedback gathering, and communication among development team and stakeholders. Now, for a medium fidelity prototype of a mobile app designed to help users organize, say, their maybe daily tasks and schedules, its aim is to demonstrate the basic structure and functionality of the app. For example, the home screen would show a simple, clean design with basic visual elements such as an app logo, a navigation bar, placeholders for different task categories or something like that, like work, shopping, personal. It would also have basic but polished visuals using actual or representative colors and icons. And then each category, say when tapped, would lead to like maybe a listing of different tasks. The listing would display maybe task names, due dates, priority levels. And then you'd have placeholder tasks. They might show up with like just basic information, like maybe, the task name or the due date. And then interactive elements like maybe checkboxes or buttons for completion and deletion. Navigation would, maybe demonstrate basic transitions and animations, providing a sense of the app's flow, and the user experience. So the digital prototype, it can be used, like I said, for user testing. Users can interact with the app to understand its basic functions and provide feedback on its usability and navigation. These digital prototypes are the most common form of a high fidelity prototyping. Nowadays the variety of specialized software allows designers to create visually rich, powerful prototypes, full of interactions and effects and complex animations. Now, the benefit of using this technique includes, specialized software is going to allow designers to say preview a prototype in a web browser or on like maybe a desktop or a mobile device. And this helps UI and UX designers to achieve optimal layout on different types of devices. And then the interactivity kind of frees the designer from having to like clarify concepts during testing, and this allows the designer to be more focused on like the observation instead. So instead of saying, oh, well, this moves to this or you click on this, it allows the user to be able to actually go through the prototype themselves. So a few examples of digital prototypes are like Marvel app, which you're going to be working with. For if you're watching this lecture, associated with my course, Fluid UI, Proto.io, UXPin. These are all different types of ways that we can create these digital prototypes. Now, last, I wanted to talk about coded prototypes. Now, a coded prototype for a mobile app involves creating a functional model of the app using the actual programming language and development tools that are specific to the platform, whether it's iOS or Android. And these are definitely considered high fidelity prototypes because of the effort that's being put into them. So instead of using like design software or say the prototyping tools that I mentioned before to simulate the app's appearance and interactions, an actual coded prototype involves writing actual code in order to create a more realistic and working version of the application. So an example of such a prototype would be like maybe creating a rich interactive sandbox that allows, say, test participants to explore a product's different features. And this type of prototyping is recommended for designers who are confident in their coding skills. Now, the benefits of using this technique include one, familiarity with the platform's constraints. Coding is going to allow designers to understand the true capabilities and the constraints of the platform that they're designing for. It also provides efficiency. So a coded prototype can be a good foundation, say, for a fully functional app. Assuming you're not building, say, a one-time throwaway prototype, what you build will provide groundwork for the final product. Now, it's if it's possible, say, to use the prototype code for the final product, you're going to save a huge amount of time and energy down the road. But at the same time, it's important to understand that prototyping typing is largely about speed. So the goal is not to really create reusable code. It's to implement a design in a way that people can interact with it as quickly as possible. So I just want to just go over really quickly some of the characteristics and the aspects of this last prototype that we're going to discuss, which is the coded prototype. So the one is it's functional and it's interactive elements. It involves writing code to create the actual functionality, and the interaction that the user is going to actually experience with the app. So they'll be able to perform tasks, navigate through screens, and interact with the prototype just like they would the final product. It's also platform specific development. So it's going to utilize the programming languages and the tools that are specific to that particular mobile platform. And so, when you create this kind of prototype, you're going to be creating it on the native development environment for, say, the target platform, whether it's iOS or whether it's Android. And then, of course, it's going to be closer to the final product. And so it's going to provide a more accurate representation of the final app. And of course, it's going to be more refined. And then you'll even be able to interact with or integrate with real data, or maybe simulated data to test how, say, the app is going to handle or display actual information. Um, Now, the thing to keep in mind that developing a coded prototype can be time consuming and resource intensive compared to, say, non-coded prototype, due to the need for actual programming and implementation of functionality. Um, but it's going to serve as a critical step between, say, the prototype stage and the final app development, which is going to allow for the validation and the testing of key features before you actually commit to a full development. So, whatever type of prototype that you decide to use for your medium prototype, just make sure that it's one that represents as far as how your app is going to be used. Because again, this is how we're going to demonstrate the user experience, of using our app.